She had arrived at the wedding hoping for warmth, laughter, and a moment to finally belong. But one moment transformed celebration into nightmare, one so brutal it stunned the room. A hand she did not see coming hit her, and the pain wasn't on her skin alone. It was freighted with decades of judgment. Eyes looked away, faking nothing had occurred, as though silence could heal the wound. But silence couldn't conceal what was to happen next, because somebody else had seen it all. And when he came out, everything was different. What would you have done? Amara was always the quiet center of her group. Solid, reflective, the one folks trusted to remain calm when nobody else could. She had created a life based on hard work and grace, one that was secure after years of practice shrinking herself just enough to fit in. And so when she received an invitation to a glittering country wedding, she almost stayed home. The crowds intimidated her, and the guest list seemed to shine with names from a world that made little space for hers. But friends had pressed her to come, reminding her she was welcome wherever she went. The mansion lived up to the photos promised. White roses tumbling over stone borders, laughter echoing through sun-drenched gardens. Amara adjusted her dress, reminding herself to breathe, to have a break in her rare weekend away. But beneath champagne and music, she could feel the edge, something brittle behind polished smiles. She reassured herself it was nerves, that she was thinking too much. But as she emerged onto the terrace, the eye of a few strangers lingered too intensely, their interest keen enough to grate. She brushed it off, choosing not to let unease spoil the day. She had no way of knowing how quickly that calm would shatter, or how one reckless act would lay bare everything they'd tried to keep hidden. The sun in the afternoon cast long shadows over the terrace as Amara sat by a secluded corner, attempting to blend into the gentle buzz of conversation. It worked for a while. There was laughter from the dance floor, the clinking of glasses, and a band playing a song that made the atmosphere light. She was almost convinced she could remain unnoticed, enjoy the evening, and leave undetected when it was over. But discomfort has a knack for discovering fissures. It began with whispering whispers, soft at first, then more pointed as they wove through the throng. A couple of heads turned, their smiles constricting as they caught sight of her. Someone murmured something behind an upturned champagne glass. Another allowed their gaze to roam over her dress, just long enough to transform admiration into critique. Amara attempted to stabilize herself. She'd mastered a long time ago how to swallow little slights, how to allow looks to slide off her like rain. But this was not the same. Denser. Intentional. Then, without warning, a voice cut through the music, hard, authoritative. The bride's mother. She advanced, her heels click-clacking against the stone as if each step was a warning. The air thinned and guests stepped back, leaving Amara alone in a ring of faces watching. Initially, the words were too rapid to be grasped. Charges ensnared with outrage. But the tone was unmistakable. "You don't belong here." Whew. Each syllable was heavy with the sort of certainty that doesn't seek evidence. Heat flashed in Amara's chest. She ached to retort, to demand why someone's rage should be dumped at her feet. Before she could open her mouth, the woman's hands snapped out. A loud crack cut through the silence. The slap wasn't only unexpected, it was deliberate, designed to put her in line while others watched. There was a silence that fell upon the terrace. In the distance, a cork exploded, ridiculous against the quiet that hung in the room. Amara's cheek stung, but it was the pressure of the silence that bore down the hardest. There were dozens of eyes, all watching, none daring to act. She scanned the crowd, hoping to see even one friend, but faces turned away, faking interest in their glasses or the horizon. The band hesitated, their instruments falling out of tune, wondering if the celebration could go on after what had occurred. For one heartbeat, Amara thought about leaving, about disappearing before harm could be done. But she saw movement by the doorway. A tall presence stood just within the doorway looking over the crowd. Her heart recognized a face she hadn't anticipated seeing yet, someone whose presence would tip the scale entirely. The bride's mother stood, smoothing out her dress, sensing nothing of how her own private cruelty was about to be brought into the light. Guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between fascination and the desire to flee. Amara did not move, as the figure drew nearer, his face inscrutable in the diminishing light. And then, the first flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face, barely enough to indicate she was aware that her power was losing its grip. What followed would determine if Amara's suffering remained concealed, or at last was revealed. The man at the door moved completely into the light, and the room around him seemed to realign. The words halted. The laughter froze in the throat. It was Jordan, Amara's husband. The reserved strength she never spoke of. The one who had forged an empire out of nothing, and used his triumph as a shield for those he protected. His gaze raked across the icy tableau. Amara frozen, one hand on her cheek, the bride's mother still standing, a cracked smile stuck to her lips. He didn't say a word, but the silence he bore was more deafening than any roar. Each glance in the room flicked between them, the unsaid query suspended heavily. Would he also pretend? Pretend not to notice the red mark on his wife's face, the shame etched across her slouch. Jordan's face clenched, and for an instant Amara thought he would blow. But instead, he moved closer, slow and controlled. His voice, when he spoke, was low but even, a knife slicing through the facade. He asked one question only, one that made the onlookers wince. Who did they think they had the right to place their hands on my wife? The bride's mother stumbled, words sticking in her throat. Suddenly the air vibrated with the tension of a room suspended between reckoning and retreat. Amara felt her knees begin to give way, but Jordan's hand closed over hers, firm and warm. For the first time that day, she was seen. Not as an unwanted visitor, not as something to be controlled, but as someone to be defended, someone to be stood with. The guilt of the wedding around them tarnished. Guests moved, whispering, unsure of what to do with their eyes. The woman who had lashed out ducked her eyes, too late recognizing the ugliness no longer masked. What was to follow would determine whether justice had finally entered that room, or whether silence was to triumph once more. The spell on the terrace was finally broken. Jordan didn't have to shout. His very presence required an explanation. Gradually, the bride's mother retreated, her bravado disintegrating as guests shifted, uncomfortably aware that the celebration had turned into judgment. A chair was brought to sit Amara down, but she remained standing, firm now, taking strength from the hand still encircling hers. The rest of the evening unfolded in tense bits. Apologies spoken, excuses made, words hushed behind half-full glasses. But under the forced quiet, something irrevocable had come to rest. The truth was out. No charm, no tradition could conceal the brutality that had just been laid bare. For Amara, the slap on her cheek dissolved many hours before the heaviness in her chest. What remained wasn't merely the slap, but the silence that had ensued, the self-imposed collusion of a room willing to allow harm go unspoken until someone with sufficient authority did so. That silence, she came to understand, was a small part of a vast wound, one that extended far beyond terraces carved from stone and flutes polished to crystal. In the days that ensued, she refused to let the moment reduce to gossip or to shame. She discussed it, calling what had occurred by its proper name. Her account became something greater than a personal injury. It was a mirror held up to a culture too ready to look away. Racism doesn't always sport a uniform or hold a gun. Sometimes it wears manners and invitations, just waiting for the opportunity to remind someone where it believes they belong. So the question lingers. When we observe injustice clothed in poise, will we remain silent, Or will we step forward to speak, even when our voices shake?